Hi everyone, it's Nicole.
And Brad, how y'all doing?
Today I'm going to show you how I loom knit without being able to see.
This is one of the questions we get pretty often, especially when people see her knitted work. How did she do it?
And it's kind of amazing to me because I wouldn't say that it's easy, but I can't believe how many people express surprise that I can actually do it.
So here we go with it. We're going to start off with some questions, and then you're going to see the equipment that she uses. You're going to see some finished work. You're going to see her actually make a couple stitches, and then at the end we're going to talk about resources. But first, big thank you to everybody who's been watching so far.
Yes, thank you so much. We really appreciate your sweet comments.
Liking and sharing and saying nice things in comments that make the day go by a little bit better. Oh, well, something in there. All right, you ready to get started?
Yeah.
All right. So what got you into loom knitting in the first place? How'd you pick this up?
Well, I learned to knit with straight needles when I was a teenager in a girls' club that I was a part of. And I liked it, but life moved on. I got older, I got busy. And about 10 years after that, as an adult, I was given a set of looms, of round plastic knitting looms, which you can buy anywhere, any craft store, even Walmart. And I was like, what do you do with these things? Well, I was visiting my family at the time, and my mom looked at the instructions that came with the looms, and they weren't a lot of help, so we went on YouTube and found some tutorials, and she showed me how to do the very first basic stitch that everyone learns, and I liked it so much that from there I continued to learn on my own.
Now I just want to say this is not going to be a how to loom knit tutorial.
Right.
Although we will talk about some places where you can find some of that. So especially for the benefit of our blind and visually impaired audience members out there, this is not a how to, this is just a how I do.
Yeah, this one's more
Well,
actually for
I
you sighted people out there. This one's more for you.
Well, there are sighted people out there?
Although, hopefully our blind and visually impaired friends can benefit from it as well.
Right. So the skills that you learned in needle knitting, they transferred pretty well over to loom knitting, wouldn't you say?
Not really. I mean, some of the concepts, like once I learned some things about loom knitting, I was able to see how it related to needle knitting. But it's the difference between vertical and horizontal, kind of. I mean, it's a really different way of doing things now. All right, so before I actually show you any equipment, I'm going to show you some things that I've made. These are just a few examples, and unfortunately, I have quite a number of the same thing. I've discovered that I've made a lot of hats. So here's one of them. It's a baby hat. This would be about a 0 to 3 month size, and I also did make the cute little pom-pom that's on top. And here's a matching cocoon for newborns. Some people call these snuggle sacks. They're just like a sleeping bag for babies. I did the top and bottom in contrasting yarns, and the middle part of it in the soft yarn that I used to make the pom-pom on the hat. Let's see what else we have in here. Ooh, we have various kinds of scrubbies. Now these are made from a special yarn, which is for making scrubbies. I have 2 oval ones and a square rectangle. I guess that's a short rectangle.
And at least one scrubby in the sink.
Yes, but we're not going to show that one because it's dirty.
True.
So these can be used for doing dishes or washing your face or cleaning. They actually work really well. They wash well.
Well, I don't recommend washing your face with it after you've done dishes with it, just saying.
No. Here's another baby hat. This is more of a summer style, and it's sort of lacy, the main part of the hat, and then the brim is made of a soft fluffy yarn, and the top bow embellishment is also made of a soft fluffy yarn. And what else can I show you guys? Oh, let's see. Oh, here's a cute little pair of booties. I love making these. They are no-sew, which I also like. And let's see, I'll show you, you can add beads to things. So here's a child's hat, a little girl's hat that I made. It's a diamond lace pattern, and I just added little colorful beads around the brim. Very cute. And Then you can, of course, also make household items. Here are a couple of coasters that I made, which match each other. They are a set of 2. So there are just some things that I made just to show you what you can do, and you can do many, many, many more things with loom knitting. These just happen to be some of my favorites to make, so I make lots of them. Okay, so here is my knitting bag. This doesn't contain everything, but I do keep a lot of things in here. So this is my Authentic Knitting Board adjustable loom. It's a long, narrow rectangle, and it does currently have a project going on it right now. But it is wooden, and it has small plastic pegs standing up from it, and these are what hold the stitches. There's a loop around all of the pegs that are in use right now for our blind and visually impaired friends, and the number of these pegs that you have dictates how large your project will be or can be.
So if you wanted to knit a whole comforter for a king-size bed, you need a bigger loom than you've got.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess technically you could do it. It would suck. But these are the more common type of looms that you can buy that I mentioned. These are round plastic looms, and they come in a variety of sizes and colors. I'm just showing several sizes here. I have ones that are from 5 pegs all the way up to 40. And you can make various things on them. Everything that you make does not have to be round. And here are some of my yarns. This is a finer baby yarn. This is an even finer baby yarn. The most common weight of yarn to use with the larger plastic looms is worsted weight, which would be sort of a medium thickness, which is what I have right here.
So you're able to tell your yarns apart, first of all, by their texture and thickness in your fingers.
Yes. And when I have several that are the same, I have a cool little thing here. This is the first piece of adaptive equipment that I'm going to show you. It's called a Colorino color identifier, and it does 2 things. There's a button that tells me the level of light. So the higher pitch the sound, the more light you have. So if I hold it down in the shadows, there's no light. And as I bring it up toward where the light is, it goes higher. And that's important because you need good light for it to do its other job, which is to identify colors. So here I have yellow yarn, and I'm going to place the end of the device against the yarn and press the other button.
Light yellow.
And it says that it's light yellow.
So for those who have some vision, there are other possible adaptations that you could make. You could set up your work area in such a way that your yarn contrasts with it. You could set up some high intensity lighting. You could set up some highly contrastive color tags on your yarns if you can see those particular colors. That will help you out there. So these here are techniques, of course, for the knitter who absolutely does not have any of those options available to her. Or him. I just don't knit.
I also forgot to show you guys this is the hook that you actually knit with, because loom knitting involves pulling loops of yarn over each other and over pegs.
And it looks a bit like, I would describe it as what a pen would look like if instead of a nib it had a hook on the end.
Or a dental pick.
Mm.
In fact, some people use those. Some people prefer them.
Oh, that's a little scary.
I agree. I also have tapestry needles here, which are plastic needles with large eyes that you can thread yarn through for sewing. I have various accessories that go with my adjustable loom. Some projects use a crochet hook. I had one. I'm not really sure where it's gone. And I also have, you want to have scissors, of course. But I also have my other piece of adaptive equipment, which is a tactile measuring tape.
I love those things.
Yes, so you can get talking ones, which are fancier and better and not good for your budget, so I don't have one. But this one has small and large rivets in it, and the large rivets are at the inch mark, and the small rivets are at the half-inch mark, and at foot marks you have 2 large rivets right there. So I use that very often as well. And that pretty much sums it up for equipment. Alright, so just for demonstration purposes, this is not a tutorial to teach you everything that you need to know about loom knitting. This is just to show you how I do it as a blind person. So I have here my small 12 peg loom, because I'm not actually going to do a real project here. I'm just going to demonstrate. And I have this nice, stretchy, soft, light yellow yarn. So the first thing I'm doing is tying a slip knot, and I'm attaching this to the little knob on the side of the loom, which is called the anchor peg. So the first stitch that pretty much everybody learns is called the E-wrap. So for that stitch, the first thing that we're going to do is cast on. And for that, I'm going to bring the yarn in towards the center of my loom. So think about the center of a circle. Wrap it behind the first peg to the right of the anchor peg, and then wrap it around so that it makes a loop. Then I'm going to bring it to the next peg and do the same thing all the way around. So we are now all the way around our loom. We have loops on every peg. It's important not to skip one. To make sure you don't do that, you want to feel between each peg and make sure that there's yarn running between each peg.
So you need good tactile awareness, good spatial awareness of where you are on your loom.
Yes.
So that you don't skip pegs and triple loop when you should have double looped or something.
Right. So speaking of double looping, that's what we're going to do next. I'm going to just do the very same thing that I just did, but I'm going to do it again so that there's 2 loops on each peg. So now I have 2 loops on each peg, and I can feel them, and I can also feel the yarn that runs twice between each peg, once on the bottom, once on the top. And again, it's important for me to make sure that they're not too tight, because if they are, then the step that I'm going to do next is going to be really difficult. So here's where I messed up a lot in the beginning. To complete this stitch, you need to pick up the bottom loop like this and pull it over the top of the peg toward the inside of the loom, over your top loop. And that's a stitch. Now I did that on the peg directly to the left of the anchor peg, which is 1 peg before where I actually started. And that is because if I now let go of this yarn, my loops don't unravel. So that anchors them in place. And so now I just go all around the loom and do the very same thing. Okay, so that is my first row of the E-wrap stitch, also called the Europe. So that is the most basic stitch, and while this would actually be my cast on row, so I would need to keep going if I was going to actually use this stitch for something. For demonstration purposes, I think that's good enough. So the next stitch that I'm going to show you is called the true knit stitch.
As opposed to the false knit or the lying knit.
As opposed to the E-wrap knit stitch. So this is the stitch that you would do if you wanted to imitate the look that you were going to get by knitting with a needle. So there are actually 3 ways to do this, and I'm going to show you all of them. So for the first one, it's actually the most complicated. I grab my first loop on my, I have 1 loop on each peg now, so I go to my first peg and go underneath it with my hook and pull that loop out from the peg. Now, there are many ways to do this, and I'm quite sure that I don't do it the way that sighted people do, but the thing is that I get it accomplished.
Adaptation.
So I have my strand of yarn, my working yarn, over my loop that is now pulled out from the peg, and with my finger I sort of fold the loop up over that strand of yarn, and I go and I scoop the strand of yarn from underneath and make another loop. I pop that first loop off the peg and put the new loop on and pull it tight. Then I do that all the way around. Alright, so that is the true knit stitch. Now there are 2 other ways to create this stitch, and I use both of them a lot more often than I do that, because as you could probably tell, that is a little bit more time consuming. So this one is called the U-wrap stitch, and it's when you bring your yarn to the outside of your loom, you half wrap it around the peg, so it's not crossing over itself, it's just half wrapped around. You take your bottom loop with your hook and pull it over your peg. And again, you do that all the way around. Half wrap, scoop up your loop, pull it over. So there we have 3 versions of the knit stitch, and there's one more, and it's called the flat knit. So for that, you pull your yarn tight across your peg without wrapping it around. So I'll turn it so that you guys can see the back. It's not wrapped around, and you take your loop and pull it over that strand of yarn. Straight across, lift your loop and pull it over. And you do that all the way around.
How many stitches would you say you know how to make today?
Stitch patterns, many of them. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Probably around 2 dozen.
Maybe. Getting close anyway. I'm always learning more
Right.
because there are always new ones that I'm finding. So the final basic stitch that I'm going to show you is the purl. And to do that, it's the opposite of the true knit stitch. So you pull your loop out from your peg, put your strand of working yarn under your loop, I hold it in place with my finger, scoop the strand up with my hook, take the loop off, put the new loop on, and pull tight.
And all of this you're doing just by sense of touch. Your awareness of where the yarn is, what it's doing, how tight it is, where you are on the loom, it's all touch.
Absolutely.
Now for a person with low vision who was doing this, who had some vision they wanted to use, they could still do this by touch obviously, but they could use some strong lighting. We could get a focused light. We put on the yarn. There's also high color contrast yarn if they needed it, or put the knitting project into a high contrasted color surface so they can really see the color differences. With this here, we're dealing with folks who have no vision to use, so this is all by touch.
Yes, and with the exception of the E-wrap was the only stitch that I was actually shown how to do. So with the exception of the E-wrap, everything else that I've learned about how to loom knit, I've learned from tutorials online.
In our final section, we're going to talk about resources.
So those are all of your basic stitches, and if you look on the underside of your loom, I don't know how well you guys are going to be able to see that, it's a small loom, but you can start to see your fabric coming out of your loom. And of course this fabric is made up of all those different stitches, which is not normally what you would do. You would, choose something and stick with it until you needed to change, or you would pick a specific pattern or what have you. But those are the basic stitches for loom knitting. And again, this is not a tutorial, it's just to show you how I do it.
It's pretty interesting.
Well, thanks.
Yeah.
I think so. It's a lot of fun for me.
Yeah, definitely. So, just briefly tell us, what are some of the most common things you make, and what are some of the most interesting things you've been asked to make? Just a little list.
Well, I like making baby items. I love knitting baby items. I think they're so cute. So I do a lot of hats and booties, cocoons, or snuggle sacks as some people call them. I've made scarves. I've even used a specific type of yarn to make little scrubby things for washing dishes or cleaning or whatever. You can use them as face scrubs. The weirdest thing, hands down, that I've ever made is a pair of panties. And I will never do that again.
So let's talk about loom knitting versus needle knitting, in that you have definitely come down on the side of loom knitting. Is that related to blindness, or is that just you enjoy loom knitting more?
For me, a little bit of both. Now, I know that there are plenty of blind people who needle knit very, very successfully. And I'm sure I could too. But I enjoy loom knitting. I enjoy the process. I enjoy, I don't know, I just like the way it feels. And also, I find that with loom knitting, it's much easier to get nice, even stitches. So that's what I prefer.
Let's talk about resources. Now, I know there are quite a number of knitting books out there in Braille, but you don't use them. Can you say a word about why?
Because they're for needle knitters.
So there are no Braille books that we know of currently for loom knitters.
None that I know of.
So we could use some Braille resources out there for loom knitters. Definitely. So let's talk about how you do, in fact, learn a new stitch. Where do you find your info, and how do you, as a blind person, find enough information so that you can confidently teach yourself a new pattern?
There are many, many tutorials out there about how to loom knit. Many of them are very visually based, and that doesn't help me at all. But I found a couple of sites. One of them I can't remember off the top of my head. If I can find it again, I'll link it in the description of this video. That has really, really good text descriptions of how to do things. They also provide pictures, so for you sighted people who might be interested, or visually impaired who can see photographs, that might help you. But they also have very good text descriptions of how to do things. And another favorite site of mine is loomahat.com. And I'm subscribed to the YouTube channel for that website. It's run by a lady named Denise. She's very nice, very talented, and she gives very good verbal directions as well. And that is one thing about learning a craft when you're blind. And when there aren't a lot of resources specifically for the blind, you have to be really good at following verbal directions. And I've had my share of frustration where I just wanted to just throw everything across the room.
So would you say that when you're learning a new stitch, let's think about the learning process. Do you like make a mental map of the process and then try to do it, or do you try to stitch along with the tutorial and do it learn by doing?
I've done both. It really depends on the complexity of the stitch, but I find that it helps me more if I, say, write down the steps as I watch the video. Then I can look back at my own notes for how to do the more complex stitches.
So what advice would you give to an aspiring person who's blind who wants to pick up a loom and some yarn and some hooks and go to town?
You just have to develop really good spatial awareness of a small area. My spatial awareness of large areas is terrible, but I don't have a problem with this. And also, just, be patient with yourself and take your time and don't be discouraged by making mistakes. Everyone does. Sighted, blind, it doesn't matter. You will make mistakes in the beginning, and the first thing you make will probably be terrible, and that's okay.
Mistakes are okay.
Don't think that just because you can't see, you can't do it. That's a good way to fail.
That's the biggest challenge. If you're losing your sight or you've recently lost your sight, some folks go through that. And our message throughout this whole channel, starting with setting things on fire and going to knitting, is it can definitely be done. And there's a lot of joy in doing it. Now, knitting is not my hobby, and that's okay because we are different people, and she gets a lot of joy out of doing it. And I've been watching her learn and grow in this hobby for several years now.
Yeah, I have no desire to set things on fire either, so there we go.
Oh, fire's fun.
Well, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. I've enjoyed my turn in the spotlight. So
It'll come again.
yeah, so if you have any questions that you would like me to answer, feel free to ask in the comments below, and I will be happy to try to help you. But until next time, take care and tune in next time for another episode of Success Without Sight.
Bye-bye now.
Bye!